Try again.
Is that it can be controlled entirely
Can you hear it now?
with your ASIAir Plus or Pro or whatever you have.
Okay,
And that's
thank
really
you.
one of the features I'm most looking forward to. Now, of course, you can control most mounts with the ASIAir Plus software, but it just works really well with this particular mount, and it streamlines your entire workflow at night. All right, now that we've got that out of the way, we're gonna go through the setup process for the AM5. As you're gonna see, it's very simple. And if you do this once or twice, you'll be good to go. Then we'll go through the ASIAir portion, and then finally I'll give you my review, and we'll see how this compares to something like the EQ6R Pro or some of the other mounts out there. Let's start off by comparing the size of the new AM5 with my older Skywatcher EQ6R Pro. As you can see right here, the AM5 is noticeably smaller and more compact than the other mount. That's because the AM5 is a harmonic mount compared to a traditional equatorial mount. And what that means is you don't actually need any counterweights for the AM5, which is pretty cool. Now, in terms of the overall weight of the unit, the EQ6R Pro is very heavy. And in fact, you can very easily injure yourself trying to take this outside or up the stairs or anything else. So this is not an ideal mount to take with you on any sort of trip. The AM5, on the other hand, though, is much smaller, lighter, and really I could pick it up with one hand, no problem. The AM5 also comes with a very nice portable carrying case, which you can see here on top of that Pelican case, just to show you the size difference. And everything you need will fit in that small black case, except for the tripod. Right there you can see the indent for the mount. On the other hand, we have my much larger Pelican case. The case alone weighs probably 20 pounds. And then when you throw in the mount in there, along with the counterweights, this thing is a nightmare to take anywhere with you. Next up, I want to draw your attention to the two clutches on the EQ6R Pro. Virtually every equatorial mount will have these two clutches. The first is the right ascension, which when you loosen it, you can turn it kind of up and down like this. And this would be how you balance the counterweight and the telescopes and everything else. That's the right ascension clutch. And you can always tighten it down to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Then we have the declination clutch up top, which can also be used for balancing, which is important. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the AM5 and any other harmonic mount out there does not have a manual clutch for the right ascension or the declination. In other words, there's no way to actually balance your telescope on this mount. And this is just a design of the harmonic mounts in general, whether you get it from ZWO, Rainbow Astro, or any other manufacturer. And this is getting a bit beyond my expertise, but these harmonic mounts have very powerful motors and drives and things, and so the engineers don't seem too concerned that you can't actually balance your telescope properly. But I still think that seems to be a bit odd. And I would personally like the ability to balance things out, but it's just the way these harmonic mounts are built. You can't really do it anymore. Although the AM5 does have a counterweight rod insertion point right here. If you take out this screw, you can install a counterweight rod and then attach a counterweight. But again, there's no way to loosen any clutches and balance it, so it really might not be that beneficial. Let's move on now to the altitude adjustments here. You can go from 0 to 90 degrees, no problem. And I have to say, the altitude adjustments are super smooth and easy to do. This is a really nice change from the EQ6R Pro. And anybody who's used that mount will tell you just how much of a pain it is to do any sort of altitude adjustments, because the screw handle here is really poorly designed and it's a nightmare to do your alignments at night with it. Eventually though, you do get used to this really messed up handle and you can work around it. But I gotta say, after dealing with this thing for over a year now, I was really excited to see just how much better the altitude screw is on the AM5.
This drone is basically a spy tool. Here's how to fly a drone they use in the military, but be warned, this drone is not a toy, even though it's the easiest drone for beginners.
Let's go through the full setup process now for the AM5. It's actually very simple. We'll start off by pulling our mount out of the hard case here. And then we'll install it right into the tripod. And I do recommend that you use the tripod from ZWO because the two pair together perfectly. Once you've seated it here inside the tripod, make sure you tighten down that screw right there. Once it's tightened down, that will prevent the mount from accidentally falling off or getting loose or anything like that. Then we'll grab this little screw, whatever you want to call it, thread it up through the bottom. That way it'll also secure the mount to the tripod. Then we'll grab our little spacer here for the tripod again, and then finally grab the little handle here and screw it all together so it's nice and tight. This just makes sure the tripod stays nice and stable all night long. The only downside of doing all this is that you'll have to take off the spacer and that screw to break down the tripod if you're going to be doing any sort of traveling. After you've gotten your mount connected to the tripod, then you can attach the ASIAir Plus if you have one. It should just slide onto this little finder shoe here on the side, and this is my recommended way to do things, because with the ASIAir Plus you can control every function of the mount, your camera, the filter wheel, and more, all through your smartphone or tablet. There is a standalone application for free that you can use to control the mount, but that's pretty basic and I wouldn't really recommend it as of the recording of this video. So I still recommend that everybody use the ASIAir Plus or Pro whenever possible. One of the great little features of the AM5 is that it has a 12-volt output right here on the side of the unit. Now I can power my ASIAir Plus directly through the AM5. I don't need a second battery. However, I ran into a problem where my standard power cable here was running into the ASIAir Plus. So there's two different ways you can work around this. The first is just to grab a right angle cable like you see here. And if you plug that into the power output, it really shouldn't interfere with the ASIAir Plus. Or you can take off the little Vixen plate here from the bottom of the ASIAir Plus and then put it on the top or the side. And you can see those holes right here. So once you've attached the Vixen plate to that part of the ASIAir Plus, you can reattach it, and again, you shouldn't have those problems anymore, especially if you have that right angle cable. And that's all there is to it. You've now powered the ASIAir Plus. Next, we can connect our 12-volt power cable to our battery. Once we plugged in the one end to our battery, we'll plug the other end into the input on the AM5, which you can see right here. So now we're powering the AM5 and the ASIAir Plus off that single battery. With your power cables attached and the battery turned on, you can click the power button here on the side. When you hear that beep, that means you're good to go. Then I'd recommend you go to the ASIAir Plus and make sure you turn that on now as well. Just one less thing to do later. At this point, we powered both devices, and now we can attach our telescope to the mount. I'm using a very small, lightweight setup today, the SpaceCat telescope and the ASI 533 monochrome camera, along with my filter wheel. And this is going to be the same as any other mount. Just tighten down the screws. And before you let go, make sure you give it the wiggle test. Make sure it's not going to fall off and break. It's always a little scary. But there we go. We've attached our camera gear. Now we can begin attaching our cables between the camera, the ASIAir, and the mount. We'll start off with the USB connection from the ASIAir Plus to the AM5. And I just connect a USB 2.0 cable between the two, like you see here. That way the two can communicate without any issues. Next up, we'll grab a USB 3.0 cable, plug that into the back of our camera, and then plug the other end into the ASIAir Plus. For those that are still using DSLRs, I'd still recommend that you control your DSLR manually, not through the application. So keep that in mind. You'll also want to connect a power cable from your camera to one of the 4 ports on the ASIAir Plus. That way you can turn on the cooling system inside the application. I normally plug this into the slot labeled number 1, but you could do whatever you want. And just to be thorough, there's also a USB cable connected between my filter wheel and the back of my camera. And this allows me to still control the filter wheel through the ASIAir Plus. Then we have our auto guider. We'll connect USB-C cable from the back of the auto guider into one of the 2.0 ports on the ASIAir Plus. And as I do this, you'll see that the ASIAir actually falls out of the slot right there. That's because I'm still using that old power cable which is getting in the way. And that's why I did some testing and I found that if you use that right angle cable, that solves the problem. So I'd recommend that everybody do that same trick. The AM5 does come with its own hand controller, which can be used to control the mount itself. And the hand controller also generates the Wi-Fi signal so you can communicate with the AM5 through your smartphone. And then if you use the joystick here, you can manually move the mount left, right, up, down, whatever. However, if you have the ASIAir Plus, the hand controller is redundant and it's actually just going to get in the way of things. So if you've been following along with me step by step and you've got an ASIAir, I'd actually recommend you unplug the hand controller and leave it in the house. You won't need it for today's workflow. And that's all there is to it. We've now completed the setup process for the AM5. there's still a lot more to do, including your polar alignment, getting the guiding set up, finding the object, and more. We'll cover that later on in the video. At this point though, I want you to use either the hand controller or the ASIAir software to move the mount around freely like I'm showing here in the video. The reason we're doing this is to make sure that our cables are long enough and they're not going to get snagged, or maybe you have a large heavy telescope here on the mount. It's possible that it might bang into one of your tripod legs if you don't have a pure extension. And now would be the time to run through all this and find any problems before it gets dark and things start running automatically. But if you verify that everything looks good, you can return the mount to the home position, and then we're ready for the rest of the workflow.
Have you heard of Executive Order 14067? Most people probably haven't, but it could completely upend America.
Before we get into the ASIAir workflow, I want to demo the AM5 software just so you can see why you probably don't want to use it. To start off with, we'll go to our phone's Wi-Fi settings, connect to the AMH Wi-Fi network here. If you don't see that, you have to connect the hand controller to the AM5 because that's what generates the Wi-Fi signal. Then we can start up the AM5 app on our phone right here and then go through the initial setup location. If you run into a problem like I did, you'll have to manually enter your latitude and longitude, which can be kind of a pain. There's a lot of different ways you can figure this information out. One way that I like to do this is through an application called the Photographer's Ephemeris. And right there in the upper right corner, you can see my current latitude and longitude. Now that I've got a rough idea of where I'm located, I can plug in those numbers here in the application. And this just ensures that the mount knows where it's located so it can do its plate solving and more. After you've dialed in your latitude and longitude, just double check that the hemisphere is set correctly, in my case east and north. And now we're in the main user interface right here. This is very similar to the Sky Atlas, which was recently added to the ASIAir Plus software. However, I think this version is quite a bit worse. There's a lot of distracting elements going on, and even the foreground there is just really bright and distracting. So for that reason, I don't really recommend using this application unless you really need to. In terms of the settings, well, there's not much there either. You can control the tracking speed, you can make it go to the home position, and that's about it, to be honest. Although, if you need to update the firmware or check any of the more advanced features, you'll find that in the Hand Controller Manage System button right here. And again, this is where you control the firmware, set up some of the other Wi-Fi things, and more. I've been running into a problem though, where when I try to update my firmware on the mount, it's giving me some unknown error. And I don't want to risk bricking the unit, so I'm not going to mess with this too much until they release some sort of patch for this problem. Anyway, that's the AM5 hand controller menu here. Just another way to update the firmware on your mount if you need to. But beyond that, there's really not much settings in the AM5. You can control some of the views there, and that's about it. So for all these different reasons, I really don't recommend using the AM5 app to control the mount. It's pretty basic as of right now, and you're not going to get much value out of it. You'd be much better off using the ASIAir Plus, which we're going to look at next. To start off with, let's go to our phone's Wi-Fi settings and then connect to the ASIAir Plus Wi-Fi network here. If you don't see it, make sure the ASIAir is turned on. Then we can start up the ASIAir app on our smartphone or tablet. Next, we're going to make sure that we've chosen the mount, in this case the ZWO AM5 near the top. Then we have our main camera and guide camera. I'm using the 533 monochrome camera, which has been doing a really nice job, and the ASI 120 Mini, which does an okay job. That's really all there is to it here, besides the main scope focal length. And now we're in our main user interface. If this is one of your first few times using the application, you might be a bit overwhelmed, so I'm going to walk you through my personal workflow. We'll start off by taking a 3-second long exposure, ideally with a bat-knob mask on the front of our telescope. And what we want to do is make sure that the telescope is focused. With the help of this diffraction spike pattern caused by the bat-knob mask, we can really get the stars as sharp as possible. And by taking these 3-second long exposures, we're not going to waste a lot of time. So basically I turn my focus ring slightly in one direction and I take another photo. If I went in the wrong way or I went too far, then I move the focus ring a bit further and take another photo. This just takes a lot of practice and very small, precise adjustments on your focus ring. Eventually though, you'll get it where the diffraction spike looks correct, and we see that right here. The spike is right in the middle. That looks great. Then we can zoom out just by pinching with our fingers, and we'll make sure to remove the bat knob mask before we go any further, because if you leave that on there, it's going to cause problems for the rest of the workflow. So pull off that bat knob mask, come back to the ASIAir Plus, and it doesn't hurt to take one last photo. This just makes sure the stars are sharp, there's no more diffraction spike, and we're good to go. That's step one. Then we'll click where it says Preview and click on PA for Polar Align. And the great thing with the AM5 is that this entire process is pretty well automated. What we'll do is click on the play button over on the right. That will begin this sequence. What's going to happen is that it's going to take a photo with our telescope and camera, and it's going to plate solve. It's going to identify all the stars and get an idea of where it's aimed at. Then we click on Next. But you got to be careful, because when you click on Next, your mount is going to start moving quite quickly actually. That's why I went into my phone's menu and turned on the flashlight, because I want to make sure that the mount isn't going to crash or the cables aren't going to get stuck. So I have that flashlight turned on while the mount's moving, just to avoid any problems. The mount has successfully moved over, taken another photo, and then it says, let's go. We've now made it to the main polar alignment interface, and this is where it's going to tell us how far off our alignment is. Over there on the right, we see a few different numbers. It says up 2 degrees, 47 minutes, 42 seconds. That means I need to move my mount upwards quite a bit. Then I have to move to the right 1 minute and 1 second, which is hardly anything. So I'm not really worried about that. What we need to do then is go to our mount and use the altitude knob here to move the mount upwards, just like the application told us. Then we come back to the application and click the refresh button there in the lower right. This will cause the camera to take another photo, and it will update that error with some new values. It looks like I did some good adjustments, but I didn't go far enough. I still need to move the mount upwards 1 degree, 2 minutes, 21 seconds. So what that means is I go back to the mount, I keep turning that altitude knob to move the mount upwards, then I come back to the application and click on refresh again. It will take another photo and give us another new set of values. Most likely, you will have some error in terms of the left and the right, and for that, you'll need to adjust the azimuth screws on your tracker. These are kind of weird, but the way it works is you turn both screws at the same time in the same direction, either towards you or away from you. And when you turn them at the same time, that should move the mount either left or right. If it doesn't seem to be moving, then make sure you loosen both these screws here on the side of the AM5. Now when you turn the screws, it should actually move things left and right. So you make your adjustments, go back to the app, click on refresh, and just keep doing the same thing over and over again until the error is as small as possible. And then when you're done, make sure you tighten down those screws back on the sides to prevent any problems later on in the night. Anyway, now that you know what to do, you adjust your azimuth and altitude screws, keep clicking refresh, and when the error is, I would say, 5 arc minutes or less, then you've done a really good polar alignment, and we can move on with the rest of the workflow. And on my first night with the AM5, I managed to get a really good polar alignment in just 2 minutes. That goes to show you that with a lot of practice and some nice smooth controls on the mount itself, you can do your polar alignment very easily without even having a polar scope, which is something I should have mentioned earlier. I forgot about it. The AM5 does not have a built-in polar scope or a laser pointer, at least the one I got doesn't. So I just wanted you to be aware that the AM5 does not have a built-in polar scope like most of the equatorial mounts do, and therefore you will need something like the ASIAir Plus to do your polar alignment. Alright, let's get back on track. We'll click on PA and then change it back to Preview. This is our main user interface right here. And I'm going to click on that telescope icon towards the top of the screen. These are our mount settings. And inside of here, you should see the option, if you scroll down, to go to home position, and then there's a start button. I'm going to do that because I want the mount to go back to its original orientation with the telescope pointing up towards Polaris, just like so. I also need to mention that you have to put the mount back to the home position at the end of the night before you turn off the power and pack everything up, because if it's left at some weird angle, there's no way to manually get it back to start like you could with an equatorial mount. So that's something you always got to remember. Anyway, we're going to take another quick 3-second photo just to get our bearings, and now we're ready to find the object that we want to photograph. This is one of my favorite features in the ASIAir. What you're going to do is click on that little icon in the lower left with the Big Dipper. This brings up the Sky Atlas window right here. That blue square, that's where your telescope is currently aimed up at, which is pretty neat. You can see exactly where your camera is aiming. Now if I click and drag with my finger along the screen, I now see a red square as well. This is where I want the camera to move to. And if you know the night sky, you can pretty quickly find the nebula or galaxy you want to photograph. If you're not that familiar with the night sky though, then you might want to use the search function, which you should see a magnifying glass on the left. That'd be one way to do it. But I do recommend that you learn the night sky so you can figure out where these objects are. And then you can zoom in to get even closer, get a really nice composition with the help of the planner right here. And once you've got your composition looking however you want, click that button over there on the far right that says Go to Cross. Now your mount is going to start moving towards this location. And while it's doing this, again, it's possible that the telescope could run into the tripod, the cables could get snagged or something else. That's why I told you to look things over earlier in the night before it got dark. Anyway, once the mount has moved over, we should now see that the blue square is where we intended it to be, in this case on the Veil Nebula. I want to make sure though that it's actually where it says it is. I mean, it should be, but it's always a good idea to double check. For this, I'll click on my filter wheel settings at the top of the screen and change the position from my luminance filter to my H-alpha filter, because the Veil Nebula is mainly H-alpha and oxygen data. And because these narrowband filters are so dim, they block a lot of light, I need to take a 5-minute long test photo. I mean, I don't have to, but I like to do it anyway, especially if I've got time to kill before it actually gets completely dark. When the 5-minute photo completes, we can pinch and zoom into the photo, and there we see the Veil Nebula with the same exact composition that we chose earlier in the Sky Atlas. It really is pretty amazing how all this technology just works together. I want you to look over the image one more time and make sure the composition looks good. You should also zoom out to get the full view, and if you're happy, we can move on with the workflow. If not though, go back to the Sky Atlas and redo your composition. Moving on, we'll click on the guide button over on the left. That'll bring up a pop-up window, and when we click on that, we'll be in the guiding interface next. From here, it's very easy. Click the begin looping arrows over on the right, and now your auto guider will begin taking photos. Hopefully, your stars are sharp and you can actually see them. If so, click on that begin guiding crosshair over on the right, and now it's going to go through and do its calibration. This should take about 5 minutes, but it's all automated, so you shouldn't have to worry about it. Therefore, what I'm going to do is click on the 2 arrows in the top left corner to go back to our main shooting interface. The reason I'm doing this is just to streamline the workflow. So while that guiding calibration is running, I'll click where it says preview and change it to auto run. This is actually how we take photos with our dedicated Astro cameras. Inside the auto run menu, click the button on the right with the 3 dots and the 3 lines. This is where we're going to configure our shooting schedule. We can tell the camera to take our different photos with different shutter speeds, but we're going to start off by renaming the target here, which will change the file naming and the folder name as well. I'd recommend just calling this whatever you're photographing, in my case the Veil Nebula. Alright, we've got our name figured out. And because the 533 doesn't need dark frames, I'm going to delete that original sequence and start over. We'll click on that big plus button, and this is where we can configure our camera settings. First up, we have the type, light, bias, flat, or dark. I'm assuming we're all taking light frames to start off with. The exposure, that's going to be how many seconds you want the photo to be, in this case 5 minutes long. The filter, I'm going to start off with H-alpha. And then for the number of photos, if I click that box with a slash through it, I can enter any value I want. Today, I'll do about 13 photos, each 5 minutes long, with the H-alpha filter. Then I'll hit OK. I also want to take a set of oxygen images though. So I'll click on the plus button again. I'll change the filter to oxygen. And this time I'll take maybe 15 images just to be safe. And then I'll hit OK. That's all there is to it. I really only need 2 filters to get a colored photo. If you look in the lower left, you should see an option to shut down ASIAir and go to home position. I'd recommend you turn on both of those. What that's going to do is just move the ASIAir back to that original orientation up towards Polaris and turn everything off at the end of the night. And this can really help you out if you accidentally fall asleep while you're shooting, because now the mount's going to go back to the starting position and turn off, and you don't have to worry about it crashing to the ground or anything else. We should probably go back and check on our guiding. We can do that by clicking the graph right there. That immediately brings us to the guiding interface where we can catch up on all the different things going on. And right now it looks like we still have our dotted yellow lines, which means the calibration is still running. As I said, it's pretty well automated, but there we go, it finally finished. If it's working correctly, we should begin to see a red and a blue line on the graph. The red corresponds to the declination axis, the blue to the right ascension axis. And usually at the start, the lines will be pretty crazy, but after the span of about 10 seconds to a minute, things will really start to calm down and your total error will drop considerably. That's why I'd recommend you hit the clear button in the lower left-hand corner to clear out that graph after about 10 or 20 seconds, so it looks a little bit more realistic. And while you're running this, I want you to go inside the house, or at the very least get away from your tripod, because even if you're just walking around out there, it's possible you're shaking things very slightly and messing with the guiding. Or if there's a bit of a breeze, that could also cause some problems here on the graph. As I mentioned earlier though, you want to let this run for about a minute or two so things can get working into an equilibrium. Then we can begin taking our photos. And you'll see right now that my total error is just over 1 arc second, which is actually really good. That means I can easily shoot 5-minute long exposures without any trailing whatsoever, even at an effective focal length of close to 700 millimeters. Your guiding might not be as accurate, and that could be because there's some gusts of wind, or again, you're out there shaking the tripod, or a lot of other factors. But if you want to learn more about guiding, I've got a lot of videos on this in my deep space course over on How To, which I'd recommend you check out if you want to learn more. And I've also got a lot of free videos here on YouTube for more info. Anyway, if the guiding looks good, we'll click on the 2 arrows in the top left corner to get out of this interface, and then we can begin taking our photos through the auto run menu. There's one other thing you want to check before you begin taking your photos, and for this we'll click on the camera icon up at the top of the screen. That brings up our camera settings. The cooling system needs to be turned on with a target temperature usually around -4 Fahrenheit, or I think -20 Celsius maybe. Either way, that will keep the sensor nice and cool, which will drastically decrease the amount of noise in your final photo. This is also where you can adjust the ISO or the gain of your camera. And I normally leave mine around 100 to 200. To be honest, it really shouldn't matter all that much, unless you're photographing a really bright object like the moon, which in that case you'd want to lower the gain to probably 0. We can now finally begin taking our photos by clicking that circular button over on the right inside of the auto run menu. This will begin the series that we set up earlier. 5-minute long photos with H-alpha, and then 5-minute long photos with oxygen. Everything is automated though, so now you can go in the house, relax, do whatever you want, but I would recommend you at least wait 5 or 10 minutes for your first 1 or 2 photos to complete. Then you come back to your smartphone, your tablet, zoom in, and verify the stars are sharp. For those of you that are going to stay up and watch the progress, the easiest thing to double check, along with the image sharpness, is the guiding. Because if you see some problems on your graph, that indicates maybe that there's a breeze, or maybe even a cable got snagged, whatever it might be. Either way, the graph here will indicate problems before anything else. If you see a lot of big spikes, something's going wrong. And that'll give you an opportunity to go out there and figure out what it is as soon as possible. But yeah, normally I just let this thing run. I check my photos every few minutes to make sure they're sharp. I can always pinch and zoom to make them as big as possible. And if you are shooting in narrowband, it's going to be pretty amazing when that first photo completes, because you're going to see a lot of detail that you might not be expecting, especially of something like the Veil Nebula right here. Before we end tonight's tutorial, there's one other thing I need to mention. At the end of the night, you always want to make sure you put the mount back to the home position, because this is a harmonic mount. If you set everything up the way I showed you, this will happen automatically. If not, go up to the telescope icon and click the Go to Home Position button. That should move everything back up towards Polaris, and then once it's aimed up there, you can turn off the power on the mount, the ASIAir, your battery, etc., unplug all your cables, and you've now successfully completed your first night with the AM5. I hope this tutorial has helped you out and you've learned a lot along the way. There are a few little things I missed along the way, and that's why I'd recommend you check out some of the other AM5 tutorials over on YouTube. Those should fill in any gaps I might have missed. For more information on deep space astrophotography, be sure to check out my deep space course over on How To.
Okay, we stopped sharing and we've really completed that far as I know, these things are really pretty simple to use. And particularly if you're tied in with the ASIAir Pro or the ASIAir Plus, they're pretty amazing. So, Greg, you've had one for a little while. Would you care to give us?
I'm sorry, I had myself muted. I'm trying to share a screen. Have you, is it coming through at all?
We see it.
All right, so I'm going to skip through some of this because he covered all of it. A couple things I'll add is, I think, he said the app you'd never use. Well, if you're doing, using the ASIAir, that's true, but it's the only way to control it. It is kind of the hand controller because the hand controller is just a joystick. So if you're doing visual observing or whatever, you need the app to get it to go to where you want to go, unless you just want to use the joystick to get close. The other thing is, he mentioned he had problems with the updates. You have to use the hand controller to do any updates for the mount. So it's required for that. I'm using it with, I'm piping in a 10 amp, 12 volt, because I do have the ASIAir connected to it. So I'm pushing 10 amps into it so that the ASIAir has enough coming out of the output of the mount. And he already kind of alluded to it. This thing is actually, my other mount is a Gym 45. I love it. This thing's really easy to adjust for doing the polar alignment. It's very simple. The lockdowns, the altitude lockdown's really nice here. It just, it locks down very easily. This one down here for the azimuth, I sometimes have a hard time actually grasping it. It just, when it's completely unlocked like this, it's hard to get your finger in there to grasp it. So it's kind of like, but overall, you only got to do that once a night, so it doesn't really matter. Up here is the output. He was talking about the output. On here, if you can, I don't know that you can read it, it says 3 amp output, and ZWO has rectified or clarified is the right answer. It's really a 5 amp output. The reason they had put 3 amp on there is that was the minimum requirement to run an ASIAir. So for some reason through the process it says 3 amp, but it really does handle a 5 amp output. The one other thing I would say is ZWO has said don't mount your ASIAir here. And if you saw how he did it, he had his USB cables hanging off the back here. And the reason they don't want you to mount it there is because those things are gonna, when it rotates to, that this section is going downwards, they've had people run it into the mount. So they're saying, do not mount it there. For that reason, I've got mine, well, for a lot of reasons, I have mine on my scope. And the other thing he didn't go into, each one of these guys comes with a periodic error. They run it through a complete cycle, and then they show you an exploded view of the worst segment of that cycle. And it's kind of nice that they've gone through that testing and you kind of know what you're getting. Now, my setup, there's been a lot of talk about you don't need a counterweight with it, but I can tell you that on this tripod, because it doesn't go very high, the legs don't extend very long, it's easy to get into a unstable position, and there have been a couple of people that have had their had their scope fall over. So if you get one of these, I would highly recommend just getting a counterweight. You're not balancing it, you're just making it stable. The tripod, you know, I've used it a few times. It's very light, it's super travelable, crazy light. You know, some people talk about, well, it's not sturdy. I don't know what that means. It is light, but carbon fiber is extremely strong. So it is a sturdy mount. And I found I needed, the first night I hooked it up, I almost, not with this scope, I'll show you the scope I was running the first night. I almost hit a tripod leg, so I immediately got the pure extension. This shaft actually takes the Ioptron Gym 20, I think it's a Gym 28 weight. It's a 20 millimeter shaft. So that's what I'm running on there. It's a it's a 10-pound counterweight. This is actually from TJ Connolly. When he was AM5, I'm basically saying you don't want to do this. You know, just because you can go with a counterweight doesn't mean you should. So again, now there's people posting having it tip over. The only reason I posted this is for the next couple of graphs. This is what I actually used. I used my refractor on the AM5 600 off the back of it. Actually, if I can go back one. On the other one, I have the ASIAir on the scope too. I put it here because then all I have to do is run two cables, one power cable to the mount and the USB cable to the mount. Additionally, I'm going to try to hook it up wirelessly. So there is a way to hook up the ASIAir to the hand controller wirelessly. So I'll be trying that in the future. So now my first, whoops, I got to figure out how to go back. There we go. My first night out, I saw his guiding results and I'm like, God, what's he doing wrong? I mean, this was just setting it up, just calibrating it and running it. And it's, I didn't do any adjustments to the aggression levels. This is like out of the box, what I was getting immediately. So the guiding I've been very happy with for this unit. So I did two objects. I did the Helix and I also did Pac-Man. And you can see here, this is actually on my next object, the Pac-Man. Here's the guiding graph, and they suggest using super low, you know, even down to half-second guiding on it. I was using 1 second here. I have a problem when I use my off-axis guider being able to do 1 second, so I do 2 seconds, and I do sometimes get this good a guiding with the off-axis guider and the C8, but this is what I was getting that night. And again, here's what I was taking a picture of. Very nice round stars, small stars, great guiding. I'm extremely happy with it. I kind of held off for a while getting it. I wanted to hear some of the feedback, and it was really about how well will this small little thing guide. And once I saw that, you know, everybody was having good luck with guiding, I haven't seen any bad posts yet about guiding. Then I jumped on the bandwagon and got one. So where I'm heading with it, though, is kind of like the color combination. So I got a William Optics tri-pier, and I left, for now, I left this piece in there. This is the ZWO extension. And the reason I did it is, number one, this thing, when you put it in there, you saw how he mounted it. He turned a screw. Actually, this top plate on their pier has got 3 screws. It mounts super easily. The other reason I left it on here is I can take it to the carbon fiber mount too. So it's very easy for me on a, you know, if I want to go lightweight and travel somewhere, I can take the carbon fiber mount. Tripod. This tripod isn't all that heavy either. So this will probably be my go-to tripod with this setup. And you can see again, here's, that's the ZWO pier extension. And it just screws onto the top of an adapter plate that goes onto the tri-pier. And that's just another picture of it. So my experience has been good so far. We've been pretty cloudy since I got it. I have only had a few nights out, but every night I've had it out, it's worked as it should. It's guided well. I've not had it do anything odd or weird, you know, in terms of what direction it went. So I'm very happy with it. Any questions?
What's the weight capacity of that mount? How much weight will it hold? Telescope weight.
I think it's, I'm trying to remember the capacities now. I think it's 13 kilograms without a weight, and then like 20 kilograms with a counterweight. Somewhere in that area. Mine are under it, so I don't remember. I'm not like on the borderline.
It's equivalent to an EQR Pro 6. It'll hold 44 pounds with the counterweight.
Okay.
So for me, it's in the simplest terms, an 11-inch would not be recommended for this kind of mount.
No, I have a friend that's using one, an 11-inch scope on that mount. In fact, my 11-inch on my EQR Pro, I think it comes out to like 30 pounds. So it's well within the capabilities. You will want to use the counterweight.
Oh, yeah.
Question, where did you get the adapters? It looks like there's an adapter to that William Optics pier. There's another one that I think looked like it was on a Celestron tripod. So
The
come up with those adapters.
well, the other tripod that looked like a Celestron had a Jim 45 on it. That was an Ioptron.
Oh, okay, so that
tripod and mount. Right. So with the Williams, basically you can put this thing on anything that has a 3/8 inch bolt, center bolt. So I ordered the William Optics with the 3/8 inch center bolt. I found that the 3/8 inch center bolt though that came on that adapter was fairly short, like really short. So I had a longer bolt made to fit in there. When I say made, it comes with a C-ring, a C-clip to hold the bolt in so you don't lose it. Like when you unscrew it, the bolt still stays in place. So I had a bolt, kind of ground down so I could still C-clip it in place and not have to worry about losing it. So I was just kind of leery. I mean, it only had like maybe 3/8 of an inch of bolt thread, and I just didn't want to be thinking about it somehow stripping out of the base plate. I probably wouldn't, but anyhow, the answer is you can order it with an adapter if you've got a tripod that's got a 3/8 inch. Maybe somebody here knows which ones do. You can put it right on there.
Any other questions for Craig?
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ken. Or
Uh,
Vince.
Vince,
Sorry.
well, it's fine. Will the mount fit on the tripod that comes with the EQ6R Pro?
I don't know.
It just seems that tripod has a great deal of stability. I also have an 11, and I'd feel a lot more comfortable knowing that I had that stability.
I think
What's the EQ? How does the EQ6R attach? I've never had one, so I don't know.
it's got the same center bolt. I think it's also the same 3/8 or maybe 5 millimeters. I don't remember which it is, but it's got the same kind of bolting pattern where you screw up through the tripod itself. There's a centerized hole, goes right up into the mount. So I would say probably not be a big problem. However, you could probably get a hold of the guys at Starzona and they'd be able to answer that pretty quick.
I'll give Dean a call.
Vince, if it's a 3/8 bolt, or you can use the one that's in it can come out, you can use a 3/8 bolt, then it'll bolt right up. I also saw, there's some people that make different adapters for other tripods that adapt over to a 3/8 inch bolt. So that's a way to go too.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Tom, Kevin here. One quick question. The stuff I've read talks about that longer term periodic error. Does that just all guide out okay with no hiccups?
At this point, I haven't experienced it. I have one on order, but mine is going to be a while.
Oh, okay.
So
I showed you some guiding results, and the periodic error doesn't seem to be a problem.
Yeah, it wasn't obvious from your guide graph at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of curious what another reason why I got a counterweight on it is, to me, I think trying to get it a little bit balanced might help the long-term care of the mount. Supposedly these harmonic drives are super sturdy and there's no backlash in them, and there shouldn't ever be backlash. But to me, just trying to halfway balance it should make it even, last longer.
they're pretty robust. They're actually based on a design that's used in robotic end of arms. And those things are worked 24/7, 365.
Yeah, and they're very precise too, those robotic arms.
Yes.
Still dealing with physics though, so it'd be interesting to see. I mean, eventually the interface doesn't allow you necessarily to see how much current it's drawing, but I can imagine a scenario where if you put an amp probe on on the outputs there, you may actually be able to see when you're balanced and when you're not balanced, because the torque, in the worst case scenario, is going to show up. It's going to show up in the current.
It's just it's a stepper motor that runs the harmonic drive. So there's a stepper motor gear down that's connected to the harmonic drive. So the amount of power requirements is fairly low.
No, but I'm saying if you wanted to peak it up, like Craig was saying, if you really wanted to know where to set your counterbalance, or if you even needed a counterbalance, I would think that you probably could put an amp probe on there, slide that thing down, up and down, and see how the current draw changes, right, from that motor.
Yeah, I didn't get that. I didn't understand that's what you were suggesting.
Well, I'm not suggesting it. I don't even know, because I don't have one of those motors. But again, it's just physics. So too much torque on that thing, you could imagine that current will be greater in a scenario where you're greatly unbalanced as opposed to where you're near to balance. And so yes, I would think that the engineer inside me wants to say that's the way to find out if you're balanced, is to measure the current. and minimize it.
I know that works pretty well on other mounts.
Any other questions or comments?
Oh, what kind of processing did you use for your images?
Same kind of processing you use for any other images, Paul. It's gathering it based exactly the same as what you would get. You can get FITS files, and most of the time that's what I do with imaging on my ASIAir. And then you can pull it into PixInsight. You can do what you want with it.
Well, I mean, which did you use? I mean, did you use PixInsight or did you use something else? Or
The world is your oyster. Use what you want. I mean, the images are not going to be any different than what you would get with anything else. The mount is just basically giving you the precision in order to get the pictures.
Right. Yeah, I know you use the mount for just the capture. But I mean, I noticed that you did, I mean, after you've captured the images is what I was asking. I mean, it's a separate question from the mount.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be stored. You can store them on an SD chip. You can download them to your computer, however you're interfaced with the mount. And then you take that file structure and you do with it what you would do with any other astro image that you've taken pictures of.
Okay, so that ASIAir uses a chip, right, to capture the data on, like a DSLR.
You can put it on a small thumb drive. It has the USB port. You can direct the image directly to the thumb drive. You can take the thumb drive to whatever computer you want to process the image on.
The ASIAir Pro Plus stores 20 gigabytes of data. And I believe the Pro does 10 gigabytes of data.
Yeah, but you can put a USB thumb drive in one of the USB ports up to 64 gigabytes.
Yeah, I actually put a 500 gig USB.
Good Lord.
I do the same, Vince, and it makes it easier because then you can just pull the thumb drive and take it to your computer to do your stuff instead of having to try to fire that up somewhere else and pull them off of the chip that's inside it, the memory chip that's inside of it.
Exactly. And now I even have a 13 terabyte hard drive that I have plugged into my laptop that is where I store it all.
Yeah, I've done the same thing. You put it on the USB drive and take it where you want.
Exactly.
Any other questions? Well, we're getting to the end of our hour. And Craig, thanks for putting a little synopsis together on such a short notice and with such short actual operation time.
I wish I would have had more imaging time here. But yeah, doesn't even look like it's going to be good this next week yet. So yeah. Anyhow,
those guiding numbers are better than my EQR Pro.
I noticed the same thing.
I have one of these and been using it for a couple months now. The only drawback that I've found is that when you use it with the carbon fiber tripod, the whole thing is pretty light. So when I had it down there at CAC and we were having some pretty strong winds, that was a little bit of a concern as far as leaving it set up all night. So I would take my scope off. It comes with a little bag, tripod to bag with that tripod, and you can stick the Jackery in there, and it makes it pretty stable. But I would be a little concerned about leaving it alone with just that tripod if there was a chance of getting strong winds.
Thanks, Alan.
So can I ask a quick question, follow up on Kevin's question about periodic error? Does the ASIAir allow you to use PhD for your guiding interface, or is it completely self-contained and doesn't allow you?
The answer is kind of sort of. So, ASIAir they've got a lot of open source software in there, and the guiding software is PhD 2. Although they limit what you can modify and change, they've dumbed down the interface. So basically you can set max duration for RA and DEC. You can set the calibration step size. You can set aggression, and that's it.
But I'm curious of whether or not the logging interface out of that PhD software functions the same as PhD.
Yeah, it creates PhD logs. So if you want to take that log and take it into the PhD, whatever that is, reader.
That's
or
the log
viewer.
analyzer. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you can do that.
So that would answer Kevin's question, because then you could just turn right around and see what the periodic error is.
Well, I find it interesting that they actually generate a periodic error chart for every mount that they produce. So they test this thing before it leaves the factory.
It's pretty impressive what ZWO is doing for astronomy.
I've been very happy with my ZWO equipment.
Wish I could say the same for their documentation, though.
Yeah, their documentation is not the best.
Like not best or it doesn't exist. Alan, what kind of guiding have you been getting?
I've been getting satisfactory guiding. I haven't, generally I'm right around one arc second. There are times it varies, where I'm.
Are you using a counterweight?
And conditions, but I'm right around there.
Are you using a counterweight?
I am. I image with a RASA 8. I don't use an off-axis guider. I use a 60 millimeter generic guide scope, and I have a 3-pound dioptron weight that I run all the way down to the end on it. ZWO, they hide it very well, but they do recommend that if you go to 10 kilograms, the limit is about 20, but if you go over 10 kilograms, they recommend that you use a counterweight.
And I think
required.
Yeah, the counterweight limit is 5 kilograms.
Right.
Okay, I thought I heard you say you're going to use a 30-pound counterweight on it.
No, I'm using a 5-pound.
Okay.
5-pound counterweight.
All right, gentlemen, thank you for coming and visiting with us, and I appreciate all the input that we've gotten from those people that actually have one of these, and I'm looking forward to starting up with mine. My basic thought process here is I need something that's portable. I'm getting a little older, and carrying around an EQ6 is really not any fun. So with that in mind, we will see you next month. You have clear skies.
Thank you.
Thank you.